Hello, Cheryl Lampard here. We're coming in a little bit early for Knit Matters, just to make sure everything works, and I know it takes a moment or two for people to come in. So I hope you're all well this week, and I hope you've been doing lots of wonderful knitting. So I can see a few of you popping up. Jill, hi Jill, how are you? Now as we go along, we won't be able to necessarily see your comments, but it's lovely to have you here, thank you. I'm just keeping an eye on the time because we do want to start at 7, and last week we were a little bit late because we had some technical issues. So I'm just keeping an eye on that so we start nice and promptly. That last minute seems to take forever when you don't want it to. And somebody else has joined, which is lovely. Okay, it is now 7 o'clock, so welcome indeed to Knit Matters. This is season 2, episode 9, unbelievably. And whether you're a regular viewer or new to Knit Matters, oh, Gail, hi to you, Gail. Thank you for joining us. So whether you're a regular viewer or new to us, thank you so much for joining. I really do appreciate you taking the time to participate in Knit Matters. And of course, if you're not watching live, you can certainly watch it on the replay afterwards because all the videos are uploaded both to Knit Matters and to our YouTube channel. I'm Cheryl Lampard. I'm an image consultant. Oh, I see Lynn has just popped up. Hey, welcome Lynn. My company is Style Matters International. And the passions that I've had in my life, the two passions I've had in my life are sewing and knitting especially. It's my relaxation, it's my therapy, and I know it is for many of you too. I was also the proud owner of a yarn store in Brighton, England at one point, and one of the great joys of that is teaching people to knit. And all these years later, it's still a great joy to be an educator and teaching people to knit, be it via a different platform. So I'm just looking at my notes. Michelle has joined us, and Dawn, thank you so much. This is lovely. So I'm still in beautiful Warwick, New York. I'm not in my studio, and I don't have Mabel Mannequin behind me because she's not with me. And I mentioned Mabel as in season 2, episode 3, we did an episode on elongated stitches, and I dressed Mabel in this purple shawl. If the camera could just go down to it. As you can see, it's still a work in progress. It's a pattern it's called Lace Shawl by Candice Eisner Strick. And I know I've mentioned it before. But when I put it on Mabel, the pattern at the centre front really stood out. And I got many comments about it. And I thought about different ways of doing this pattern. It really is a lovely pattern. This is the Honeybee pattern. And so many of you asked about it, I thought we'd do an episode on that, which we're doing today. Now, how else could you use this pattern? Because even if the pattern doesn't show it, obviously in this design, it's a central point of the design. But you could add it in different ways. So you could actually put it, I'm just going to ask the camera to bear with me. Imagine that if you put that along the center of a sleeve, how nice that would look. That would be very cool, because it's not really going to disrupt, if you were doing stocking stitches, it's not really going to disrupt the stitch count or the pattern anyway, but you could add interest by doing that. I have added beads on this one. I've done this many times, this shawl, for friends, and I love it. This one is actually for me, which is why it's probably taken so long to do. But I've added beads along here, easy enough to do, so that was fun to do. So there's all sorts of ways that you could use it, or you could simply, and I'm going to move this one out the way now and show you another sample where I haven't done it in such a regimented fashion. I've done it as part of the body of some knitting. Now, I haven't had time to block this, and it could certainly benefit from that, but I think you can see the idea. These are just sort of almost like bees flying. They've got no edge stitches around them, but you can see the idea. So it creates a really nice, pretty airy motive. And as I say, once that's blocked, that will look a lot better. But I just wanted to show you that you don't have to do it in a regimented fashion, in a straight line, or just, as a panel. So the Honeybee stitch uses several techniques, but we've done them before. Edie, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Eddie or Edie, thank you for joining us. So our honeybee stitch uses several different techniques, all of which we've done before. But this time we're putting them all together. So it is both an elongated stitch and a drop stitch pattern, plus a few other things. And it makes a very striking motif. It's also sometimes called the, I'll bring this one back so you can sort of see that. It's also sometimes called the lace hearts pattern. And you can actually see why here. These sort of form almost heart shapes. Oh, Georgetta's joined us. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed tonight's episode. So you can see why it could also be called a lace hearts design, although in my research to see other similar designs, there's a slightly different technique that's used. And Shirley, welcome Shirley. Thank you for joining us. But as with most things in knitting, there are variations to the honeybee stitch. So if you're following a particular pattern, then do what they say, unless you want to do it differently. But you need to make sure that your stitch count is going to be there, is going to work with the pattern that you're doing. But this version is the one I'm going to demonstrate. Okay, and you can see I've just done a little sample piece here, and I've just done one pattern to start off with, and I'm going to work up. And again, you could do this in a strip. You could do all sorts of things. You could actually do it vertically around the bottom of a sweater, or maybe, probably not as a cuff, but you could certainly do it somewhere that is unexpected. And that's what I like about little motifs like this that are really striking. You can actually do different things with them. Okay, so I'm going to show you how to do this. Now, don't worry as we go along if the instructions I'm giving you seem a little bit onerous. I will actually write them out during the week, and then I'll post it on the page when I've done it. But I want to show you the technique, because there's a few things here that you might think, especially beginners might think, I couldn't do that. But you can. We've actually covered everything we're going to do here. We're just doing it a little bit differently. There's just one stitch that I will show you that we probably haven't done, but it's really no big deal. So the pattern itself requires 14 stitches. I've actually just added an edge stitch here, and then what I call a panel stitch, just to make the pattern stand out a bit more as we're doing it. But when I talk about the stitches that I'm doing and how many to count in, I'm not going to mention these. This is merely to make the pattern stand out and give me a neat edge. So the only stitches I'm talking about are the ones for the 14 stitches of the honeybee pattern, okay? But I've actually cast on 18 stitches here. It's the 14 that we'll be concentrating on. So let's get on with this. If I could just, okay, I just need a little bit of room here. So in our first row, and it's different, we're doing something on right side rows and wrong side rows, okay? So that's something we need to pay attention to. So ignore my first 2 stitches and my last 2 stitches. This is where it matters. So we're going to knit 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now I'm going to do knit 2 together. Easy so far, huh? I'm going to do 2 yarn overs, or yarn round needles. If you're from the UK, you probably know it as yarn round needles. So I'm going to do 2 of those. 1, 2. Now the next 2 stitches I'm going to do knit through the back of the loops. This isn't the same as an SSK. This is a knitting through the back of loops. And Iris has joined us. Iris Jones, thank you so much. Welcome indeed. So we did knitted 5, we knit 2 together, we did 2 yarn overs, and now it's knitting 2 together through the back of loops. Sorry, I'm just going to take that out. I'm going to go back because I beg your pardon. So I've done knit 5. This is my knit 2 together, 2 yarn overs or yarn round needles. Knit 2 through the back of loops. It's not the same as an SSK, because an SSK puts the stitches on the needle, the resulting stitches in a different position. This is a knit through back of loops. Now I'm going to knit another 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Don't worry about my edge stitches. Okay, now on my next row, row 2, which is the wrong side row, I'm going to purl 4. The next stitch we're going to do, so this is my purl 4. Now we're going to do a left leaning decrease. And I will be doing this several times, so don't worry if you don't get it first time. There's nothing difficult about it, but it's a left leaning decrease. So we purl 1. I slip the next stitch knitwise to my right hand needle and I keep the yarn in front. Okay. Now I'm going to slip both stitches back to the left hand needle and I'm going to pull the slip stitch over the purled stitch and I'm going to put that back on the right hand needle. Now before you say, well, that seems a lot of palaver to just go from one needle to the other, but it's the way the resulting stitch sits back on the needle, and that's important for this stitch, otherwise you're going to get twisted stitches on the front. But we'll be doing that one again, so don't worry about it. Now I'm going to do 2 yarn overs, but I dropped the ones that I did on the previous row, okay? That's a bit alarming when you do that, but that's supposed to happen. So 2 yarn overs again, or yarn round needles. Now I'm going to do purl 2 together, 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, that's right, I did 4. Sorry, I lost count there. Purl 2 together, and then purl 4 stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. So that's 2 rows done. And you can see how that's already opening up. So here we go with row 3, which is a right side row. And on this one, I'm knitting 3. 1, 2, 3. Now I knit 2 together. I drop those yarn overs and 2 yarn overs. And this is where I do that knit through the back of loops again. When you're doing this, when you're dropping those yarn overs from the previous row and you're doing these yarn overs on this row, the tendency is you want to go really tight here. You don't need to. It's just normal, your normal knitting tension, because you need these drop stitches. You'll see why in a minute. And if they're too tight, you won't be able to create the pattern. So knitting through the back of the loops for those 2 stitches, knit 3. So each row we're sort of decreasing, we're not decreasing, we're knitting and purling less of the stitches at the sides, and we're opening up this middle part with our right leaning knit 2 togethers and our left leaning decrease there. Okay, so we're not decreasing because we've got the same number of stitches, but you see what I'm saying. Okay, so now we're on row 5. And if you are we on row 5? No, we're on row 4. I was just about to say, you can easily remember where you are. So I've got this, I split this stitch here. Let me just get that back on the needle in the right way. Okay. So we are on row 4, which is purl 2. And we're going to do another left leaning decrease. Okay. So it's purl 1, slip this stitch knitwise. You keep the yarn in front. You slip that next stitch knitwise with yarn in front. Slip both stitches onto the left hand needle. Pull that one over the purled stitch and slip it back to the right hand needle. Okay. And if I didn't say in the first time I did this to slip it knitwise with the yarn in front, I'm sorry, but that's what we do. But you can see what I did in the video, but you do need to slip that knitwise, okay? We drop these yarn overs, and it's 2 more yarn overs, and now it's purl 2. Purl 2 together and purl 2 to finish that row. Now at this point, if you are forgetting how many rows you've done, it's actually quite simple, because you'll know by how many elongated stitches you dropped. So I can see 1, 2, 3, and I've got the 4th on the needle. So I know I've done 4 rows. So I do like to use a row counter, but if you don't have one for this, it's not the end of the world. You'll know where you are easily enough, okay? So now we're doing row 5, right side row, row 5. Now we've only got 1 stitch left to do a knit one there before we knit those 2 together. Okay, knit those 2 together. 2 yarn overs again, drop those 2, and then it's knit through the back of the loops for 2 stitches. And then finish the row. Now we are on a wrong side row, and it is row 6. We go straight in with our left leaning decrease this time. So it's purl 1. Slip this one knitwise onto the right hand needle, then slip them both back to the left hand needle, pull the slip stitch over the purl stitch and slip that back to the right hand needle. Drop those stitches, or those yarn overs I should say, yarn around the needle twice, then we're purling 2 together. And now the fun starts on this row. This is the row that I really like. So you can see here that we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Once that's dropped, there'll be 6 kind of yarn overs that we've dropped. So 6 kind of ladders, if you like, or rungs of that ladder, I should say. Okay. And if you think you can tidy this up when you've done it, but if you're getting slightly loopy stitches there, that's easy enough. You just pull those up, but you can do that afterwards. So this is the row that's really fun. This is row 7. It's a right side row. And this is where I need another pair of hands at the moment. So we knit 1. I'm going to drop these off now because this is where we do 5 stitches that we're casting on with a backwards loop. Now, if you remember, we've done this several times, don't lose the stitches off this needle. This is much easier when I'm doing it in my lap, but just bear with me while I'm on the tabletop. So it's backward loop cast on, and it's 5. 1, 2, and you want to give those a little tug. You don't want those too loose. 3, 4, 5. Okay. Now, got my yarn back in my right hand. Now I'm going to lift these loops. So I'm going to go, remember I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 rungs of my ladder that you can see there. And I'm going to, with my yarn at the back, I'm going to go right under there and lift the loops with a knit stitch. Let me show you that again. So all I'm doing, make sure you get all the 6 rungs of your ladder. Otherwise you won't have a honeybee stitch, you'll have something else. So make sure that one at the bottom is often the one that's easy to miss. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And I'm going right underneath and just doing a knit stitch. Now I like to keep that fairly snug. Depending on your pattern, it might want you to keep it looser, but I like that to be snug. And again, this is where I need my other pair of hands again. I've got to cast on 6 stitches this time, 6 using the backward loop. And you loop that round your thumb, backward loop. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And I want those snug. I'm pulling them fairly snug, and you'll see why on the return row. Okay, so I cast on 5 there, lifted up my loop, and cast on 6 there. Now I knit that 1 stitch, and that's the end of that row. Now the purl row, our wrong side row, is literally just that. But you'll see why in a second why I kept those nice and snug. So this is just my purl row. And this is where you need to, all of the stitches along here are purl. But you need to use the tip of your needles to kind of get in there. And the reason I do those snugly is because otherwise they get a bit ugly. They get loopy and loose. So 1, 2, sorry, I hit the camera there, 3, 4, 5, oops, this is where you don't want to lose them. So I'm just being very careful here. I didn't pearl that. It was almost a slip stitch. Yeah, you don't want to drop these, because if you drop those backward loop cast-ons, they're quite hard to retrieve, so kind of hang on to them with your thumb. Now I'm purling the lift loop stitch, if you will. And again there, because there's sort of two sides to that lifted loop stitch. Now I've got these other 5 that I'm purling, okay? We're not increasing any stitches, we're just bringing back the stitches that we've lost while we did all those knit 2 togethers and the left leaning decrease and all the yarn overs. So we're coming back to the same number of stitches that we started with. Okay. And that is how you do your honeybee stitch. There you go. Now, if you're going to say to me, well, why do I need to do the backwards loop cast on? You know, I'm just going to do another row so you can see really how this looks once you've done your honeybee stitch and added a couple of rows in. And then I'll tell you why we do the backwards loop. So when you're doing your honeybee stitch pattern, depending on what your pattern says, and certainly with that lace shawl, there's another couple of stockinette rows that I do. There's 3 more stockinette stitch rows that I do before we start the honeybee stitch again. But it depends which pattern you're doing. If you want your honeybees to be sort of more spread out, then you might want more rows. That's for you to decide, or your pattern to decide. And Barbara has joined us. Welcome, Barbara. I'm just going to do another purl row, and then you can really see it in all its wonderful glory. Okay. So the reason I do the backward loop cast on is because the pattern says to do that. But here's the story behind that. I said to you, I've done that lace shawl several times, and I love it. But when I first did it, I either didn't realise that I was supposed to do a backwards loop cast on, and I just did my own cast on. And what I found was that I got a really ugly gap where that, caught the needle there. So I didn't do a backwards loop cast on when I first did this stitch, and I got a really nasty kind of loop here, a cast on loop there. And I hated it, and I did all sorts of things. The next shawl I did it differently, and I sort of tweaked it and did a twisty stitch and all sorts of things, not realising that a backward loop would actually solve all that. So that's why you do the backward loop cast on, because you don't get any nasty kind of gaps there. It's really very pretty, it's really very nice, and you don't have to fiddle about as I did trying to get your cast on sorted. So although the backward loop cast on seems a little bit fiddly, it's honestly not, and it's really worth it. So that is your honeybee stitch, and it's only 8 rows, and everything that I just did we've done several times before, other than that left leaning decrease, and it's not that difficult once you get the hang of it. Okay, so as I say, it's usual to do a few more rows of stockinette stitch, but again, if I bring back this cream sample and I have my bees flying everywhere, I've got a lot more stocking stitch and rows between them, because they're meant to be spaced out there. Whereas in something like this and the shawl, they're not. They're in a nice sort of row, as it were, or a vertical row. So I'm going to ask the camera to come back to me. I really hope you found that useful. As I say, I will type up the instructions for that, and I'll post it during the week. But if you have any comments, or you're not sure what I was doing, have another look at the replay after we've posted it. And if it's still not clear, just drop me a line in the comments threads. I really do enjoy receiving your questions and your comments. And I hope that episode, that lesson on the honeybee stitch has made it clearer for you. And again, I'm not expecting you to remember how to do it, but it's just sometimes when you've seen it done, it becomes easier when you see it in a pattern. It's like seeing a recipe made. You're not expected to remember it all, but you remember that, oh yes, I saw how that was done. It wasn't as bad as I thought. And really, a knitting pattern is a recipe for the piece of knitting that you're going to do. Okay? So, don't forget, our friends at Mary Maxim offer 20% off one item from their website if you choose to buy anything. But you must put Cheryl as the promo code in to get the 20% off. And if you're buying several things, it's 20% off the highest price item. But you must put that Cheryl code in at checkout. As always, this episode and all others are uploaded to our Knit Matters page within 24 hours. They're also under the playlist on our YouTube channel. So if you haven't seen that yet, please go there and subscribe to it, and then it'll make sure that you don't miss any Knit Matters replays. And of course, if you're searching for the replay later, this one is Season 2, Episode 9. So thank you very much again for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope it's made you want to get out your needles and try that honeybee stitch. In the meantime, stay well, stay calm, stay knitting, and I will look forward to seeing you again next week at 7 p.m. Eastern. Bye for now.